Messiah. We're going to be continuing our study on developing a biblical philosophy of history, a biblical worldview. In this lesson, we're going to look at the four major worldviews. And we need to recognize that having a worldview, what your worldview is, makes a major difference in how you view every aspect of our world. History, politics, culture, education. So we need to make sure that we are looking at our world and whatever realm it is with a correct worldview, a biblical worldview, and a biblical worldview that must be based on the teaching of the Word of God. Not, for example, post-millennialism, but pre-millennialism. There are four dominant worldviews in the Western world. And we're not going to look at the first three in really any depth at all. I'm just pointing them out. Number one is secular humanism. This worldview dominates our secular colleges and universities. Unfortunately, it's also made inroads into some of the Christian colleges and universities. The secular humanist worldview is that God does not exist. Only nature exists. They deny God and the supernatural in every way from start to finish. Man then becomes the supreme authority. Now this has taken over the United States. If it dominates our colleges, our secular colleges, what are we then producing out of those secular colleges? Individuals with a secular worldview. You can see it in the movies today. You can see it in the political system. You can see it, as I said, in the educational system. And it is the dominant worldview of our society today. The second major worldview is communism. Secular humanism is the root of communism. Remember, secular humanism says there is no God. The final authority is man. So secular humanism is the root of communism. In essence, it differs little from secular humanism. Karl Marx himself said, quote, "Communism as fully developed naturalism equals humanism." So there's really very little difference between the two worldviews. And so you can understand if a politician, for example, is a secular humanist, and many are, for them to slide over into the communistic/socialistic worldview and adopt it and accept it and promote it, it's very understandable because that's all they see is real. It's wrong. So there is little difference, essentially, between a secular humanism worldview and a communistic worldview. The next worldview, the third one, is cosmic humanism. This worldview has been increasing in the West. Some estimate the number of adherents to this belief system in the United States as high as 60 million people. Now, my guess is that's probably too high. But regardless, 500 million around the world would embrace this worldview, cosmic humanism. This worldview believes all is God and all is perfectible. Thus, they deny a personal God, they deny absolute truth, and they elevate oneself ultimately as God. Well, as we look at these three worldviews, there's really little difference between them. Secular humanism, communism, and cosmic humanism. At the core of each of these world views are atheism, materialism, and evolution. And there are many out there that might give lip service to a belief in a God, even a Christian Judeo God, but in practice, and really in belief as well, they are secular humanists, or socialist communists, or cosmic humanism in practice. All of the humanist worldviews have one main thing in common. They stand unalterably opposed to a biblical worldview. So whatever of these other worldviews have front and center, they oppose a biblical worldview. You can see it in our society with the opposition to no abortion. The secular worldview believes in abortion, believes in homosexual marriage, and believes in really lawlessness. Their laws, not yours, at best. And then all of these views predominate in our schools and publications, but especially secular humanism. Now, the question, I guess, really has to be, or should be asked, why is this? When we have close to 200 million or more of the people in our country claiming to be Christians, and only 10 million or so that profess to be secular humanists. If that's the case, why is the predominant view taught in our schools and publications a secular humanism viewpoint? Well, as I just said earlier, people give lip service, at best, in many cases, to the Christian God. But in reality, they're a secular humanist and lead their life oftentimes that way. So what is the source of these views that embrace atheism, materialism, and evolution? Remember, all of them, all of these secular worldviews, be it secular humanism or communism or the cosmic manifestation of this, they believe that ultimately we control our destiny. We are God. So what would you think is the source? Well, I think you know. It's Satan. Remember at the rebellion of Satan, it's recorded for us in Isaiah 14 and verses 12 through 14. Satan said, I will be like the Most High. He wanted to be God. When Satan deceived Eve, he deceived her with a lie, you shall be as gods. The sin of Babylon, that powerful nation many years ago, one of the reasons for their fall was, thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. I am deity, I am God. Secular humanism was the sin of Babylon, one of them anyway. The ultimate demise of every society we find in Romans chapter 1. They changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature. You can see the de-evolution of a society in Romans 1 and about verse 25 to the end of the chapter. And it begins when they reject a sovereign God, transcendent over mankind, and they change the truth of God into a lie. And who do they worship and serve? Themselves. That's what's happening in our society today, the United States. How about the rule of the Antichrist? He, the Antichrist, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God, that they should believe a lie. Antichrist will claim that he is God. He is indwelt by Satan. And the lie of Satan and the source of all these other worldviews of self, of a God complex, comes from the demonic realm, the satanic realm. And Satan is the source of cosmic humanism, of communism, of secular humanism. It comes from Satan. They're grounded in the lie of Satan that we can become gods. That's what Satan deceived Eve with. It's what the Antichrist will deceive the world with. That is one of the main lies of Satan and has been throughout history. Satan's deception is active in this world. Now, we can think of religions. I mean, how about Mormonism, which teaches that they become gods? And many would say that Mormonism is a Christian religion. It is in no way Christian. It is a cult, but they teach that. But consider some of the following quotes here. You don't have a God in you. You are one. I am a little God. I am, too. He opens up the union of the very Godhead and brings us into it. A small miniature God, speaking of believers, this person is. We, the church, are Christ. You are a little God on earth running around. You are God. You know where these quotes come from? Ken Copeland, Kenneth Hagin, Paul Crouch, Morris Cerullo, and Benny Hinn. That extreme wing of so-called Christianity are teaching the very lie that Satan deceived Eve with, that the Antichrist will claim when he comes into the world, that led Babylon to her destruction. That is the source of all the unbiblical worldviews. Satan's lie that we can become gods. See, we need to be careful when we develop a biblical worldview, because Copeland and Hagin and Crouch, who's no longer alive, and I'm not sure about the rest of these men, but Cerullo and Hinn, they all claim to preach the Bible. They are a tool in the hand of the devil, not preaching the Word of God. The fourth worldview is a biblical worldview. And I would much rather use the term biblical than Christian. Benny Hinn claims to be a Christian. Mormon claims to be Christians. And there are other groups who I would not agree with. So what we need to develop is a biblical worldview. Reynolds Showers, in his book, What on Earth is God Doing?, said this: apart from the knowledge of this war between God and Satan, it is impossible to understand what life is all about. The only way to learn about this conflict is to study the philosophy of history presented by the Bible. You have to study the philosophy of history found in the Word of God, found in the Bible. Secular history teachers will never understand it. Secular universities will never grasp it. Politicians, secular politicians, which are the vast majority of them, don't have a clue and will ultimately be doing Satan's bidding. We have to develop a biblical philosophy of history. Within Christendom, there are differences in our worldview. There are two interpretive methods used in biblical Christianity. The two views may agree in many points on such things as Christology, soteriology, salvation, etc. I'm talking about within conservative, fundamental belief systems. There's a great difference, though, in how these two views understand major issues such as ecclesiology, the church, and eschatology, future things. So there are common things, common ground, but there's some major differences. And those major differences will greatly influence your biblical worldview, and which is the correct worldview. Our next lesson, we're going to briefly look at these two Christian interpretive schemes, these two Christian views of history, interpretations, and further develop a basis for our biblical worldview. Shalom.